Born in Shinjuku on December 22, 1965, Higuchi grew up watching Tokusatsu. Previously in this retrospective, I talked about the production history of the live-action Attack on Titan films, from the origins of Tokusatsu to the career of Shinji Higuchi and the various changes this project went through. So if you haven't checked that one out, I highly urge you to do so before dropping into this one. The difference between low context and high context is that while the former is more straightforward and explicit, the latter is more intricate. There are more subtleties and nuances when it comes to getting its message across. This notion is normally used to compare how different cultures communicate with one another, mainly high context cultures such as Korea and Saudi Arabia, opting for oral communication that's mixed with tone and body language, while low-context cultures like Germany and Scandinavia prefer written communications. These methods can also be compared to different media, especially international cinema. For example, let's take two movies from different countries that are based on the same manga. Wang Jing's City Hunter from 1993 made in Hong Kong, and Yuichi Sato's City Hunter from 2024 made in Japan, both based on the Tsukasa Hojo manga of the same name. In Jing's City Hunter, the movie has an introduction where we meet the main characters, understand their backstories, get their quirks, and move on with it. The story is a pure action comedy through and through. In Sato's version, the characters are more developed over time as the story progresses. We understand their motives, their personalities, their desires, and it is shown through various scenes where they experience growth. Basically, Zing City Hunter is low-context media as we are told explicitly shown that Ryoseiba is a womanizing city sweeper, while Sato's take is high-context in that we are shown that not only is Ryo a headstrong, perverted marksman, these character traits are contagious throughout the film, as they naturally affect him in the environment, especially his partnership with Kaori. Let's step outside of Japan, but remain in Hong Kong for a little. Andrew Lau and Alan Mack's Infernal Affairs from 2002, and Martin Scorsese's The Departed from 2006 shared the exact same story. However, one of the biggest differences is how they portray their respective crime bosses. Eric Sang is Sam, who, despite his occupation, is very well-mannered and treats his gang with the utmost respect, almost like a father figure, but comes with his own limits. On the flip side, Jack Nicholson's Costello is a disgusting yet terrifyingly alluring leader who may be one step ahead at all times, but is very short-tempered. Yet none of this is explicitly stated through dialogue, as these traits are simply shown and thread together their dynamics with other characters, as well as the tone of the story as a whole. Although Costello is more low context than Sam because, well, he is very clearly a bad guy. But that's not a bad thing because Nicholson pulls it off tremendously well and still leaves enough room for Sang's performance to be an incredibly unique experience of its own. Which is superior? Well, neither. That's up to you. Now, placing this idea of high context and low context, you can probably figure out that on one hand, Attack on Titan is very much high context media, with its themes relating to the brutality of war, the effects of propaganda, and how far people are willing to go to achieve their ideas of peace. But at the same time, it's also low context media. We're all very familiar with the revenge story, thanks to the likes of John Wick. We understand the ideas of the war epic, thanks to Dunkirk. We can invest ourselves in the tension and spectacle of the monster thriller, thanks to Godzilla. It is this sense of familiarity, in addition to its explicitness, that almost makes it low context, thus becoming very accessible to audiences. In fact, there are more fans of Attack on Titan overseas than in Japan. But we can use these ideas to understand the core concepts of the story. While this pertains to the manga and anime, the live-action films take on a wholly different approach, and are very much their own beast entirely. Let us finally take a look at these movies and see them for what they truly are deep down. Attack on Titan Part 1, or simply Attack on Titan, released on August 1st, 2015. It's pretty standard and straightforward in terms of its plot. 100 years prior to the events of the film, the Titans appeared and began devouring humanity, leading the surviving population to live within 3 massive walls where they can live in peace. However, that peace comes to an end when a colossal titan appears and destroys the outer wall, letting waves of titans enter and prey upon humanity once more. Now, it is up to the scout regiment to embark on a mission to restore the outer wall, while defending off any danger that may come their way. The first movie takes plot beats from the fall of Shiganshina and all the way up to the early parts of the battle for Trost arc while putting their own spin on them. How are they executed? For starters, the colossal titan appearing was terrifying with its eerie roar and a monstrous visage. The Titans coming in through Monzen is horrific as it amplifies the manga's dark atmosphere and focuses on the horror of these giants with the amount of gore. Not to mention the iconography that proposes allusions to the Nanking Massacre and the firebombings of the Allied forces during World War II. The baby Titan that appears halfway through is disturbing and retroactively more depressing when you realize why it's there. Eren saving Armin from getting eaten was an emotional moment even if we see the twist coming from a mile away, though the payoff is justified. The last scene with Eren in his Attack Titan form was definitely the highlight of the entire first film, with impressive miniature work, suitmation, and fight choreography directed by former Power Rangers stuntman Keiya Tabuchi. The Attack Titan is played by stunt actors Nao and Yasutaka Yuki. They do a spectacular job showing off this Titan's athleticism and fighting capabilities. And I think it's safe to say that this particular design for the Attack Titan is just excellent and menacing, thanks to Koji Tajima's superb and, dare I say, underappreciated talent. I should also note that when time came for Amazing Jiro to model the head, he decided to base the face on HARUMA MIURA, the actor who portrays Eren. One of my favorite things about this part is the world building. A lot of dystopian films tend to focus on making these worlds feel distant, but here, the way the setting is depicted almost makes it feel closer to our time. If human civilization were to fall apart, I would imagine that some nations would try to maintain a sort of tranquility through the approach that we see here. But I'll get more into that later. It is also in this movie that we get to see how gorgeous and bleak the atmosphere and set design can be. Monzen is very beautiful and full of life, and the scenes shot in Gunkanjima give this feeling of hopelessness, as the island in real life was abandoned after World War II. There is this looming impression that death can appear at any corner, which is complemented by the idea of having a cast of characters who find themselves in a situation where they have no choice but to fight in order to make things right for themselves, harkening back to how the ruling class of Imperial Japan treated its civilians. And additionally, the idea of them being disposable or expendable only further emphasizes the cruelty of this elaborate system formed by their superiors. But more on that later. In case I haven't suggested it, in part 1, the effects surprisingly look very good despite the apparent limitations. I am willing to forgive some of the more imperfect parts due to the inherent nature of tokusatsu productions, specifically when it comes to some of the ODM shots. But something worth noting about the use of ODM in both these films is that all the actors did their own stunts. All except for KIKO Mizuhara's Mikasa, as she was portrayed by the aforementioned Yasutaka Yuki in only a couple of shots. In fact, it is said they hired a stunt actor for Eren only for his skill and talent to get outshined by HARUMA MIURA himself, who then replaced him. All the miniature and practical work just looks astonishing. I already mentioned the Colossal Titan earlier, but I have to mention that the animatronic used to portray it was operated by up to 12 people at most, and that the hands, fingers, arms, head, mouth, and even slight facial movements were designed to function individually. The CG enhancements given to the Colossal thanks to Higuchi's hybrid approach definitely gives it the extra spice it needed to come off as imposing. Higuchi brought later Godzilla designer Takayuki Takeya to design the Colossal Titan, and his original designs for this monster are nothing short of just nightmare fuel. And the effects team did a wonderful job bringing it to life. People often mistake the Colossal Titan for being completely computer generated, when in reality, it's an animatronic, with only few instances where it is fully CG. I also love how each Titan is different in terms of build and appearance, as the makeup work on them adds a level of fear, dread, and sheer scale that I felt was sorely absent in the early parts of the anime. They took the goofy and basic designs of the Titans from the source material and amplified them to be more terrifying than before. Even the sillier ones still managed to be disturbing and unsettling. It's also worth noting that Shinji Higuchi and KATSURO ONOUE told the Titan actors to pretend their favorite food was running away from them, and that they needed to eat it no matter what, which certainly explains the performances. All of these elements are complemented by the music composed by Shiro Sagisu, as it really adds to the film's dark atmosphere while also sprinkling in some tracks that convey hope, intensity, and sadness. While this is based on speculation, I suspect Sagisu may have looked at Howard Shore's work on Lord of the Rings as inspiration, given how they use identical instruments and how their leitmotifs convey similar ideas. I also have to give props to the acting here, as they really poured a lot of emotion into their performances. People have said the acting is too cheesy or too melodramatic, but you have to realize that a lot of acting in Japanese cinema is very derivative of the country's earlier forms of theater. So it's going to come off as exaggerated at points, but that doesn't deny the fact that the cast is really doing what they can to deliver solid performances. Yet, it works considering Attack on Titan's melodramatic approach in its story. And now, if I had one gripe about Part 1, while I previously excused some of the visual imperfections due to limitations, a good third or so of the film has this day for night effect that unfortunately washes out some of that impressive effects work. But what about the characters? Eren is played by the late and great HARUMA MIURA, a beloved star who had really come into his own before his unfortunate death by suicide in 2020. Starting off as a child actor, MIURA really left his mark in films and J-dramas like Sky of Love and Kimi no Todoke, and took on more serious roles in The Eternal Zero and The Hours of My Life, but that's just an oversimplification of his acting career, because he's really proved himself to be one of the absolute best performers Japan has ever had, landing huge roles as time went on before his depression unfortunately got the best of him. I highly encourage you all to look into his filmography and discography, especially his posthumous work. He was even a local hero, being one of the people who donned the identity of space-time warrior Ibeliger, who led a team of androids whose sole mission was to encourage love and happiness across Ibaraki Prefecture. It would have been a disservice if I hadn't highlighted Miura's career and impact for a video such as this. Miura was also a huge fan of Attack on Titan, as in interviews he was always excited and enthusiastic about playing the role of Eren, a character who he connected with so deeply, and was very clear that he loved the source material and didn't mind all the changes and additions that were made for the films. You can see his passion in his performance from embodying the character's rage and kind-heartedness. He even took up training in mixed martial arts to prepare for the role. And looking back, it's almost insane Miura had to apologize for playing Eren years later.
I never thought that I would actually be playing Eren. There's a strong sense of humanity I really wanted to bring to the character.
Eren starts the story off as this sort of rebel who's frustrated by the world around him, while also being oblivious to the existence of the Titans, dismissing them as an old legend up until he sees them for the first time. And upon seeing this horror, he starts to seek vengeance upon them for killing everyone in his hometown. When it came to developing Eren, Isayama wanted not just a typical shonen protagonist, as it would be very easy to interpret Eren as such. He wanted a take that felt more human. Movie Eren starts the film as this free spirit who refuses any sort of responsibility, blaming the world for his problems, but as soon as the Titans appear, his emotions begin to take over as it has left a scar on his psyche.
Eren is not that sympathetic as a shonen manga hero. I want him to be an ordinary youngster who gets paralyzed with fear when he sees the Titans.
The live-action version of Attack on Titan has aspects that are different from the original one, like the story and the setting, but the youth that is trapped in the walls, longing for freedom, is vividly sung.
So remember when I mentioned that Shinji Higuchi grew up in Ibaraki Prefecture? Well, this is where the scenes in Monzen are shot, including the invasion. Growing up in Ibaraki for some time, Higuchi was not only young, but lonely. His parents were rather strict, and he didn't have a lot of friends at school. While he certainly had his own sets of different passions and interests, it was almost as if he had to hide them in fear of ridicule, as his parents wouldn't let him watch TV and even threw away his Sofubi collection during his first day in 2nd grade. Though regardless, he took it upon himself to forge his own path, one where he will face whatever challenge that stands in his way, almost just like Eren, who feels powerless in the very world that surrounds him. His dreams become shattered and stripped away by giant creatures he never thought were real. Yet they both took charge and took on the world on their own terms. Much like how ISAYAMA applied childhood and adolescent experiences to the Attack on Titan manga, it appears Higuchi did the same here. Mikasa, played by KIKO MIZUHARA, is Eren's girlfriend who would later be thought to have died during the destruction of their hometown and returns as a highly skilled warrior. A lot of people have talked about it, but this take on Mikasa is wildly different. She doesn't come off as headstrong as she is in the manga, and her relationship with Eren is almost completely different. I will explain more soon, but I will say that I personally wasn't a fan of this take on Mikasa at first, specifically in the first movie, and that is nothing on the actress herself, as KIKO MIZUHARA clearly had a lot of fun playing the character. And it also helps that she really connected with Mikasa in the source material as discussed in interviews.
Mikasa is a beautiful woman as a heroine, but what is also attractive is her extraordinary strength.
She even took up a training program to try and achieve Mikasa's physique, but despite her efforts, she didn't have enough time, though Higuchi reassured her that it was perfectly okay. By the way, Mikasa having a scar on her abdomen is such an inspired choice. A perfect warrior who carries the pain of her mortality. Armin, played by KANATA HONGO, who claims to be the biggest Attack on Titan fan in the production, is essentially the same as his manga counterpart. The weak but intelligent and strong-willed childhood friend of Eren and Mikasa, who later becomes a genius tactician who would gain the faith of his comrades.
Armin is the one who sees the story from beginning to end from a human perspective. He grows up and perceives the events more objectively.
There has been some controversy surrounding the fact that Armin did not have blonde hair in the films, but it is worth mentioning that Armin's hair in the manga had a more brown coloration.
I think the most common response is, why is Armin's hair black? There are many Armin-like qualities from the original work that made it into the movie. On set, there were many people who loved Attack on Titan. Director Higuchi understood what made the source material so good.
Jean, Sasha, and Hanji, all played by Takahiro Miura, Hitomi Miyauchi, and Satomi Ishihara respectively, are all very familiar to their manga counterparts in terms of characterization and personality, with some minor changes. In the manga, Jean originally enlisted into the military because he was in favor of living a more luxurious life in the interior, as opposed to fighting for humanity. Here, his father is who gets him to join the military, and Jean clearly doesn't want a part of it, while also still being a privileged individual with a superiority complex who initially takes the Titans for granted. Eren and Jean being rivals is also a little funny, as HARUMA Miura actually helped Takahiro Miura with his stunt work. One addition made to Sasha, who is still the joyous comedy relief, is that she and Armin form a particular bond with one another, using her marksmanship to complement his strategic mind, and it is clear that they have each other's backs. The scene where Armin gives Sasha some potatoes is just adorable. Out of all the characters in the film, Hanji is easily the most faithful to her manga counterpart, down to her mannerisms, personality, and interestingly enough, she is the commander of the scout regiment before that responsibility was even given to her in the manga, though this time, she has a love for weapons in addition to her interest in Titans. Ishihara even went as far as to go to voice actress Romi Park, who voices Hanji in the anime, to find herself as the character.
I consulted a lot with Romi Park, the voice of Hanji in the anime, and she taught me how I should make my own version of Hanji stand out. We even worked on how I would speak. I was then able to become Hanji.
Now we get to the film's original characters. The first we meet is Soda, played by Pierre Taki. Soda fills in the role of Hannes, being a garrison officer who has had some history with Eren and his family. Though here, Soda almost feels more like a father figure to Eren, as he's willing to do what he can to protect him because of a promise he made to his mother. You get the feeling that Soda really cares about him, and almost sees him like family, which kinda hits considering both of theirs had already passed at this point in the story. We also meet Lil and Fuku-shuu, played by Rina Takeda and Shu Watanabe respectively. They're more like Hana and Franz in the manga in that they're really more in the background and don't exactly offer too much to the story outside of being set dressing for the cruelness of this world and how badly it tears people apart. One of my favorites is Sanagi, played by Satoru Matsuo, as everything about his character is completely original. He's a farmer who joined the military so he can help try to support his family after everything is said and done, and comes off as this lovable, gentle giant who's very outgoing and protective of his comrades. Also, the dude can straight up judo throw a titan, and as ridiculous as that is, there is an in-universe explanation for it, and it comes directly from the manga, as despite their sheer size, titans are actually disproportionately light in weight. While that may contradict the destruction that they're capable of causing, in a way, it just goes to show how the filmmakers were dedicated to incorporating as many plot elements as they could, that they'd use such a small thing that is often forgotten about. Another is Director General Kubal, played by the legendary Jun Kunimura. Kubal is an amalgamation of numerous characters, specifically Erwin Smith, Dot Pixis, and Nile Doc, being the commanders of the respective branches in the source material. And it is through this particular character that we start to get an idea of the film's themes. Kubal is donning a uniform that is very reminiscent of an SS officer's uniform during World War II. Another piece of info is that his character was based on former North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il, and special effects director KATSURO ONOUE has stated that the events of the film were partially inspired by the Battle of Okinawa, as lots of Japanese soldiers and civilians were essentially sent to their deaths during a violent war, as their leaders thrived off of unfounded optimism that led to the downfall of the Japanese Empire, and many people having to lose their lives either directly or indirectly.
It was a very bloody experience of turmoil, spearheaded by a government who manipulated and brainwashed their people into thinking that there was hope for them.
In this context, outside of the aforementioned parallels to Nanking and the World War II bombings that are drawn across both movies, the Walled Society acts as a mirror to imperial control, where no one should dare oppose the might of the ruling class. And of course, there is the infamous Captain Shikishima, played by Hiroki Hasegawa.
I would have loved to have played a character like Tetsuro Tamba. Shikishima is a mysterious character with no clear identity. His constant chuckling gives him the air of a mysterious hermit who knows all the secrets. In fact, Shikishima has a sort of madness to him, and based on his appearance ravenously eating apples, he is like a Joker of kabuki theater.
There's a lot more about this character I want to get into later, but in the film he was more or less a stand-in for Levi, being the captain of the scout regiment, donning a purple cloak to signify his nobility, and this did not sit well with a lot of fans. However, one must consider that Levi, despite easily being the most popular character at the time, was not entirely developed when the films were in their planning stages, including negotiations with Hajime Isayama, as it wouldn't be until early 2014 when the Uprising arc would start to emphasize him more, which mind you was a little bit before they were getting ready for the production stage. And considering that the films were heavily emphasizing the horror of the Titans, a character like Levi would have killed some of that tension, even if Higuchi and Machiyama wanted to include him from the start. And interestingly enough, it is because of this emphasis on tension that the use of the ODM gear isn't too frequent.
Isayama and Kawakubo told me, you should show the mobility gear as little as possible, that way the feeling of despair continues.
Also, Levi probably wouldn't have been developed properly, considering how many characters are already present. Additionally, prior to playing Shikishima, Hiroki Hasegawa has admitted that he wasn't too familiar with Attack on Titan, so in a way, he really had to help breathe life into a character who was purely made for this production. But in a strange twist, Shikishima shines as one of the best aspects about these films, delivering a performance that's mysterious, sinister, yet very charismatic.
I didn't know much about the original work, but with Shikishima being a new character, it didn't feel like a lot of pressure. But I did get a lot of calls from friends saying, "Are you playing Levi?"
Although there is one original character who is rather interesting in terms of their original purpose that was apparently dropped for unknown reasons, and that is Hyana, played by Ayame Misaki. In the film, Hyana is a single mother who joins the military to try and get support for her child. Hyana grows a liking towards Eren and is abruptly killed off. I've yet to mention that in the first movie, Mikasa has been entangled in an odd relationship with Shikishima after it's revealed that she's still alive. And in the novelization, we see Hyana developing feelings for Eren early on and more naturally. The final draft of the script makes their liking toward one another a bit more apparent, to where Eren sees Mikasa again for the first time after 2 years. It's awkward because they see that they've already moved on, as they both were thought to have died. This makes it hard for Eren and Mikasa to reconnect because of the fact that they moved on after coming to terms with something that wasn't really the case. Unfortunately, we may never know why Hyana's character received the short stick. Shinji Higuchi expressed that he himself thought the whole love triangle aspect with Eren, Mikasa, and Shikishima wasn't necessarily needed, and it seems he and Tomohiro Machiyama really wanted to emphasize how important Mikasa was to Eren, someone he really cares for and is willing to put his life on the line for. While we do get hints of that throughout both films, you can tell it was meant to be more.
The romantic plot wasn't planned in the beginning. However, this movie is about helping each other based on the trusting relationship that human beings have.
Overall, the first Attack on Titan movie is fairly solid. The acting is good, the cinematography is great, the music is incredible, the characters are memorable, and the special effects are outstanding. Obviously, it's not without its flaws, but it's not really enough to ruin its strengths. Thus, this brings us to... Yep, I'm also going to talk about the miniseries. Don't worry, this will be quick. In April of 2015, when marketing for the live-action Attack on Titan duology was in full swing, it was announced that there would be a 3-episode mini-web series titled Attack on Titan, Hangeki no Noroshi, or Counter Rockets, Signal to Strike Back, or Beacon for Counterattack, depending on the translation. In collaboration with BTV, nowadays known as DTV, with episodes dropping on streaming throughout August of that year. The aim of the series was to serve as supplementary material for the live-action movies, as it took place during the 2-year time skip that occurs in Part 1. These episodes would mainly focus on the supporting characters, both old and new, as well as establish how the omnidirectional mobility gear came to be in this universe, with the addition of seeing the lives of the trainees as they prepare to take on the Titans. Creatives behind the series included Assistant Director Kimeyoshi Adachi directing Episode 1, Special Effects Director KATSURO Onoue directing Episode 2, and Modeling Director Yoshihiro Nishimura directing Episode 3, with Yusuke Watanabe writing each episode, as well as Shinji Higuchi as General Manager. Episode 1, The Counterattack Begins, focuses on Hanji, as well as series original character Izuru, a military police officer who serves as a stand-in for a Moblit burner played by Yuta Hiroka. The episode borrows heavily from episode 15 featuring Sunny and Bean, and is honestly a pretty solid episode, as both Ishihara and Hiroka have wonderful chemistry and the comedy and suspense are executed very well. The Titan makeup doesn't look the best here, but the compositing is done nicely. The episode takes very good advantage of how self-contained it is. Also, if you think Satomi Ishihara nails it as Hanji in the movies, she is full-on Hanji in this. Episode 2, Bow and Arrow of Hope, focuses on Sasha as they reveal her backstory, showing that she was a hunter who helped support a loving family, until the Titans ran everyone out of her home village. We also see more of Chief Yunohira, played by Yu Kamiya, who, despite what little screen time he had in part 1, was actually a very intriguing character with a stoic, no-nonsense demeanor. Here we see a side of him that's almost akin to Keith Shada's, as he truly wants the best for his comrades. A very sweet episode all around, with the addition of also showing how the bond between Armin and Sasha began to form. Then we get to episode 3, Departure for Freedom. This one is interesting. The focus of the episode is to further develop Fuku-shuu and Lil, as well as establish how the relationship began. In the midst of all of this, a group of officers crash the training camp only to be followed by a bunch of tonally inconsistent shenanigans. It's wacky, goofy, and while I can appreciate it for what it is, the quality is unfortunately nowhere near as tight as its predecessors. As one would imagine, this miniseries didn't quite meet expectations, as it unfortunately got muddled by the reputation of Part 1 after its release. Thus, not many were interested. Believe it or not, there was actually a screening for all 3 episodes in Los Angeles back in September 2015 for the Japan Film Festival in hopes to pick up a North American distributor, with Rina Takeda as a special guest. However, the screening was met poorly. To quote an anonymous source who attended the screening, "It was embarrassing." It's a shame too, because something like this had great potential to really expand the overall lore. While Hangeki no Noroshi is mostly enjoyable for its interesting stories and fun character dynamics, overall making it a neat and serviceable supplementary material for the live-action movies, there was plenty of room for opportunities that will unfortunately be unfulfilled. Don't get me wrong, this is actually a pretty decent show on its own. It's just that in context, considering its wider, more grand universe that's established by the movies, it left more to be desired. But enough about Hangeki no Noroshi. Let's finally finish this story with Attack on Titan Part 2, End of the World. Released on September 19th, 2015, seems to be the more divisive of these films, as the story really starts to go in its own direction, as at the time of the release felt more distant from the manga. However, this is where we start to see more of Isayama's creative input at play, as several plot elements, including several from the first movie, would actually make some appearance in the manga after their release. The opening flashback with Eren as a child is almost an exact outline of Eren Kruger's backstory. Afterwards, we see during his trial that Eren's ability to transform into a Titan has caused tensions within the military, which then makes a statement on xenophobia, as Eren desperately claims that he is human, only to realize that he has always been trapped in a corrupt system that does not allow freedom to flourish, as attempts to defend him by Armin, Mikasa, and especially Soda are futile. It is here when we are introduced to the Armor Titan, played by Tokusatsu stunt actor Makoto Arakawa, also known as Japanese pro wrestler K36. The design, while obviously different from the manga in some ways, is honestly scary and feels powerful. I dig the skeletal appearance that Koji Tajima went for, and it looks amazing in suitmation. We are eventually treated to the origins of the Titans thanks to Shikishima. I already did a whole video explaining the origins of the Titans in these films, but to put it short, the Titans originated from an experiment involving a serum and a bioweapon that had gone awry. It's a lot more simple compared to the manga, but considering the direction and intent of the filmmakers, it does make for a scary origin. One that's disturbingly believable and even eerily parallels the experiments of Unit 731. This also explains the baby Titan from the first movie. And in the novelization, it's confirmed that these films not only take place 100 years from now, but are actually 2 centuries into the future. Now, as mankind lives in a constant state of fear, this has allowed the ruling class of the walls to ensure as much control as possible by any means necessary, manipulating the past, present, and future of civilization. I should also note that this scene, which on one hand seems like a precursor to Paths, was not only inspired by The Matrix, but had creative input from Shinji Higuchi, HARUMA MIURA, and Hiroki Hasegawa all together, and was shot in 2 to 3 days. It is also in this sequence where we see a glimpse of Shikishima's supposed bisexuality, confirmed by Isayama's editor Shintaro Kawakubo and Tomohiro Machiyama.
It's like Satan tempting Adam and Eve. Satan is bisexual.
I think he will be liked by both men and women.
But doesn't this sound familiar? We have an Attack on Titan story set 100 years into the future, following Japanese characters in a Japanese setting with modern architecture, and the Titans were the result of a military experiment gone wrong. This is the exact premise of the original Attack on Titan one-shot from 2006. It turns out these films borrow more from Chapter 0 with elements from the manga sprinkled in, which in an odd way makes it even more faithful to the source material, almost to where one could say that this is Attack on Titan in its truest form. But as the story progresses, Shikishima's goals are more nefarious than originally thought. He wants to use the explosives they possess and the bomb that the Scout Regiment dug up to destroy the remaining 2 walls and let the Titans devour those in power as a form of retaliation against their oppressive rule. Eren is opposed to this as it would cost the lives of thousands. Shikishima ignores this as he feels that the people are just as guilty as the government for allowing themselves to be exploited by higher-ups and relying on them for safety. This is where Eren starts to rethink his worldview, as his quest for vengeance has turned into one of fighting for the future of mankind. This is something that is very relevant today, where corruption and prejudice is very real, and everyone has different methods of going about how to achieve some form of peace. It becomes clear that Shikishima is meant to be a darker reflection of Eren, somebody who strives for freedom but only by means of destruction. His warped perception of reality is thanks to whatever harsh treatment he endured in his youth, which led him to have such an immoral yet unfortunately realistic perspective on obtaining peace. While Eren, on the flip side, has faced cruel treatment by superiors and has had his home taken from him, but despite this, he still believes humanity is worth fighting for because there are truly good people in this world who do not deserve to have their lives taken from them. Their treatment of Mikasa also happens to be a reflection of their character. Shikishima's feelings for Mikasa are selfish and one-sided, whereas Eren treats her like an actual human rather than a mere tool or soldier. The film also heavily implies that Shikishima is Eren's older brother, which, considering when these films were being developed, this would make Shikishima the basis for the character Zeke in the manga, as screenwriter Tomohiro Machiyama would actually collaborate with Isayama in developing the character. Shikishima was inspired by real-world revolutionaries by Che Guevara, but more appropriately, Roshigumi founder Hachiro Kiyokawa. Kiyokawa was a highly educated and very skilled swordsman during the Edo period who sought to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate after the Sakurada Gate incident, where Chief Minister Ii Naosuke was assassinated for signing the Treaty of Amity and Commerce in 1858. Shikishima, in an interview, was also called a kabukimono, which is a term used to describe someone as strange or crazy, as the term derives from the word kabuku, which means to deviate, especially as kabukimono were normally ronin, or samurai without masters, and would form street gangs. The eventual fight between the Scout Regiment and Shikishima that follows not only flexes tighter compositing and ODM sequences, but feels like a loving throwback to the very tokusatsu media that inspired it. The martial arts on display from Yasutaka Yuki and Makoto Arakawa through Kei Tsubuchi's direction is on point. It really feels like Attack on Titan, as Isayama's primary influence for Titan battles was to incorporate mixed martial arts into Ultraman. There are even smaller details, such as when Shikishima punches Eren's face off like in the manga. It is worth noting that different suits for the armored Titan were used. The main fight was shot with the standard suit, while action close-ups show the suit with a smaller head and larger body. Some close-up shots of the armored Titan are even depicted by means of a mechanical model. Yet there is something a little tragic about this fight as well. It is here that you start to see signs that the Attack Titan suit was deteriorating over the course of production. By the time shooting was completed, it was rendered unusable. In fact, only the head exists in designer Amazing Jiro's collection. We then bear witness to another battle of epic proportions, filled with tension, dread, while showcasing various kinds of special effects as a means to convey a grand finale against the Colossal Titan, who kickstarted this journey to begin with. I love how they even go as far as to reference the cover of Volume 1. Here, through the talents of Kiyotaka Taguchi's compositing and Keiichi Sakurai's VFX cinematography, the Colossal Titan is truly a special effect come to life. Also a very big move on Higuchi and Machiyama's part to make the Colossal Titan this terrifying symbol of systemic corruption and fascism that our heroes cannot escape from, but must face and overcome for the good of humanity, as it always lurks when you least expect it, ready to destroy any sense of hope and freedom for its own gain. While Attack on Titan Part 2 may stray further from the manga, it's a film with a lot of layers, and is honestly more in line with what Attack on Titan would eventually become afterwards. Part 2 is actually quite an improvement over Part 1 in that regard, as the scope feels greater, which as a result offers a greater spectacle. The cinematography is more colorful and creative, the music is still just as amazing, and the performances are honestly just brilliantly executed to perfection. Look no further than the scenes where Haruma Miura and Jun Kunimura flex their acting chops to one another. I can't help but admire it greatly. Also, Mikasa actually ends up aligning more with her manga counterpart as she grows to stand up for Eren and is willing to risk her life for him. But on the topic of Mikasa, another point of contention regarding the bond between her and Eren is the scarf, where the context differs tremendously. But despite this, there is still an emphasis on the scarf's importance to Mikasa, as it is a sign of the bond they share. No matter what, Eren giving his scarf to Mikasa is a small gesture that shows his love and appreciation for her, and given that she would continue to hold on to it, evokes the idea that even when separated, they will always be together. It's a touching subtlety, and I'm sure we've all had those small moments that truly encapsulate the people we respect, even if it may sound ridiculous. After all, Mikasa goes through plenty of trauma in these films. It's no wonder why she would continue to hold on to something as little as a scarf from someone who actually viewed her as a human being, not a soldier, not a simple lover, but an actual person, thus freeing herself from the dehumanization of military extremism. Hey everyone, ever since this was recorded, I started thinking more about how Mikasa was handled in these films, and that was when I noticed how no one ever seemed to point out that her relationship with Shikishima is a surprisingly accurate portrayal of an abusive one. Notice how she is very emotionally stunted whenever she's on screen. We know she cares deeply for Eren, but is afraid to express that. In the scene where Eren tries confronting her, she lashes at him to redirect her pain onto him because she knows what would happen if she targets Shikishima instead. Mind you, Shikishima merely used her as a tool to get to Eren, and as we see, has no regard for her well-being whatsoever. This is also evident by how whenever they're on screen together, she is clearly disassociating. This is not a relationship that is being romanticized by any means. After all, the apples are a symbol of temptation, the original sin. In this case, the temptation to give up your autonomy for power, whether it is the power for revenge, control, or ambition. We are supposed to feel uncomfortable by this, and root for Mikasa to not only regain her humanity after being a trained soldier, but to free herself from the monster that has trapped her into this never-ending war in the first place. But when she does, it's very uplifting. The reason she is more like the Mikasa we know in the second film is because she is healing. She is getting herself back, and that's just beautiful. Another thing, Part 2 has these small moments where Sasha and Mikasa bond with one another, and this occurs after she pulls Mikasa aside and asks her about Shikishima. The next time they're together, she catches her alone and tries consoling her by being present, even offering her a potato later on. And when Shikishima has the upper hand against Eren, after putting on full display the kind of abuse that he inflicts onto Mikasa, who is the first to derive his attention by throwing an apple at his head? Sasha. So with next to no dialogue, this movie managed to convey that Mikasa opened up to Sasha, who then does everything to be by her side and get a hit onto Shikishima at the right opportunity just to get at him for being a scumbag of a human being. It's such a subtle detail, but once noticed, it really shows just how much humanity is in this story. It's actually wonderful. Moving on. Shoji Ohara's cinematography, complemented by special effects cinematographers Keizo Suzuki and Keiichi Sakurai, do an amazing job with dynamic framing, angles, and camera movement when it comes to capturing the tension, emotion, and scale of a scene. This being thrown in with Higuchi's experience as an animation storyboarder truly makes it feel like manga. It's wonderful to see these methods translate beautifully in live action. As mentioned before, the films draw parallels to Nazi Germany, North Korea, and mainly Imperial Japan. And with plot elements like Kubal being the colossal titan and Shikishima being an anti-government extremist, Attack on Titan is a story of how war and unchecked power can affect people. There is no true good versus evil, only people pursuing their idea of peace through what they see as the greater good, moral or immoral, deeming those who oppose them as being in the wrong. These small things give very dark implications about the world building in this universe, which reflect our own reality. Knowing that the government purposefully destroyed the outer wall, letting Titans in only to send soldiers to risk their lives restoring it, all for the sake of population control, all for the sake of achieving some sort of peace, sounds absolutely insane all around, but at the same time, you can't help but find it believable, as it sounds like something an ultra-fascist nation would do to its people. Now, remember way back when I talked about the notion of low versus high context media? As you can probably imagine up to this point, these movies are pretty high context, arguably more so than the anime. As opposed to giving off that sense of familiarity we're so used to in the manga and anime, the movies feel almost otherworldly and bizarre in comparison. Yet any familiarity that is present is reminiscent of the real world. While these movies still carry the same core concepts and elements from their source material, their nuances are rooted in a more abstract sense, but still distinguishable. In cases, it's both as explicit and not as explicit as the source material, as there's more emphasis on how the characters respond to the world around them. It is through this more abstract approach that director Shinji Higuchi challenges us to find the deeper meaning in these nuances by taking issues such as political corruption and social prejudice in a way that reflects our reality. But at the same time, at its very core, Attack on Titan is a story about freedom. These two films leave us with a hopeful message, and it all comes back to Eren Jeager. The growth that Eren experiences throughout this duology is just inspiring. Growing up, we all have this desire for freedom, to get away from whatever brings us down, and we decide to blame the world for it. As the story progresses, Eren goes from being this emotional and impulsive delinquent to becoming someone who is more than willing to take matters into his own hands. Someone that people can look up to, a symbol of youthful optimism. Eren learns to place the people he loves and cherishes before himself, all with the notion that if we set aside our differences and come together with a common goal, we can accomplish anything. You can accomplish anything. No matter what state the world is in right now, we have the power, the courage, and the strength to overcome any obstacle that comes our way, as we can do everything in our power to make a difference, to create a brighter future and a better tomorrow.
It's not about what you do for yourself, but what you do for others. By taking action for others, your spirit will grow many times more.
It has now been 10 years since the live-action Attack on Titan movies were released. Since then, they've achieved a cult status in Japan. They have been nominated for Best Visual Effects at the 2016 Asian Film Awards, receive revival screenings through Dream Pass on occasion, and are shown at the Gunkanjima Digital Museum in Nagasaki as a 3-part episodic special edition. These movies are admired by tokusatsu filmmakers and performers like Yoshikazu Ishii and Tsutomu Kitagawa. Eren's actor in the Attack on Titan musical, Kurumu Okamiya, has paid his respects to HARUMA MIURA, as did a close friend of MIURA, Yuki Kaji. KIKO Mizuhara has publicly said that she would love to play Mikasa again.
I'll do my best again. Let's do it! But first, I want to retrain my core.
In an interview with Looper after the US premiere of Shin Ultraman, Shinji Higuchi states that he has no plans to revisit Attack on Titan. And you know what? That is perfectly okay. No matter what Higuchi thinks of his adaptation of Attack on Titan, there is no doubt that it was an important stepping stone for his growth as a filmmaker. Higuchi not only went on to co-direct a fantastic revival of the Godzilla franchise with Hideaki Anno, as well as direct an incredible reimagining of one of Japan's most beloved superheroes, and a fantastic successor to 1975's Shinkansen Explosion. He even went on to storyboard episode 46 of the anime. In an interview with Famous Monsters of Filmland in 2017, Higuchi thinks fondly of the production, but admitted that it's hard to justify adapting anime and manga into live action.
There are so many good anime and animators in Japan that I don't think we necessarily need live-action movies. The stories are already told so well in anime, we may not be able to do so well with live action.
But the truth is, he left behind a very important footnote in the history of tokusatsu cinema. A footnote that may also be the last time we'll ever see films like this. And even though tokusatsu's presence has mainly been regulated to television, Attack on Titan makes for the perfect transitioning point towards films such as, in recent memory, the Academy Award-winning Godzilla -1. One may ask, why bother? To that I say, why not bother? This is a unique experience that can only be accomplished in this medium. From an adaptational standpoint, it's not going to be the same regardless, but you will find echoes of the source material that you may find welcoming. As of 2018, Hollywood supposedly planned to remake Attack on Titan at the time of recording this. But even taking Hollywood technology into account and the deeply unfortunate executive enforcement of AI generative technology, the Toho Attack on Titan films will forever have a special place due to their sheer ingenuity against all odds. It's honestly a miracle that they exist, and it would be a terrible shame for these films to be forgotten about as time goes on. They have plenty to offer, whether or not you're a fan of the original story. And it is bad enough that these films continue to be ridiculed based on unfair judgment. Obviously, these films aren't the manga or the anime, but in fact, they weren't trying to be. These films celebrate Tokusatsu and ISAYAMA's interests, much like how the manga does just that, all while being a surprisingly nuanced story about war, fear, hatred, companionship, the youth, and ultimately freedom. Though I suppose the disconnect comes down to a sizable chunk of Attack on Titan's fanbase being very young. After all, this is an IP that is marketed towards teenagers. The only way for them to engage and grapple with a more complex commentary on war is if it is juxtaposed with a neat and flashy spectacle. Their insistence that the movies are uncanny only wound up as an acknowledgement that their ideas and execution feel almost too real when compared to the source material. The element of escapism only becomes more subjective. But on another note, if movies like Jurassic Park and Blade Runner are beloved despite their wild differences from their respective material, why not Attack on Titan? And with that said, Shinji Higuchi, Tomohiro Machiyama, Hajime Isayama, thank you for creating one of the greatest and underappreciated epics of the modern era.
When I was a 19-year-old, thinking about a story of man-eating giants, I thought to myself, I would like professionals to create this story. And even though I never thought this chance would ever come about, I still went on to develop Attack on Titan, but with an awareness of the limits of my skill. It struck me that this film was what I had been longing for. The opportunity for top professionals to produce a world of man-eating giants. I wanted to remove the limitations that exist when writing a manga and move away slightly from the manga, so I proposed ideas and concepts that differed from the original work. I just wanted for the story to be created with a wider vision. For me, the film adaptation of this story was not just about recreating the original work. The aim was really to create an interesting and engaging picture. And I think that with this movie, we've achieved what we set out to do.
If you're someone who enjoys these films like I do, feel free to sound off and share your experiences with them in the comments. I would love to continue this conversation depending on how this goes. I want to give a huge shout out to Fuku-shuu on Tumblr for preserving a lot of the information that's present in this video from articles, interviews, and so forth. Fuku-shuu also helps moderate Team MIZUHARA across social media as well as SNK News on Tumblr. I will provide links in the description and any additional sources I use for this project, so feel free to check them out. On that note, thank you all for watching what is easily my most ambitious project yet, and thank you to Cole for helping put this together. I deeply mean that.
You get it? I'm dead.
And since you've already made it here, I have my own novel and a Patreon, where you can subscribe to all sorts of perks, including early access to videos and exclusive content. And that said, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys later. Take it easy, everyone.